All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the final day of the DSP conference. Just a couple quick notes before we get started. And I'll mention a couple of these again later, but for those of you that are here now, the slides from the presentations from these 3 days are posted online. If you go back to where you registered on the DSP website, where the agenda is, they're all hyperlinked to the presentation slides. And there will be a survey sent out to all registrants following the conference as well. So welcome your feedback there. If you weren't here the first couple days, just please get close to the mic when you ask questions. We have a lot of Q&A today. And yeah, if we're up here and we're not being heard, please let us know. Just a reminder to stay close to the mics. And then Chris, you have a reminder for those online?
Okay, for those online, the chat is disabled, but you can use the Q&A function, which is a button on the bottom banner, to send in your questions, and I will read them to the room.
All right, thank you. So yesterday, many of you participated in breakout sessions with your DepSOs, your Departmental Standardization Officers. And your DepSOs have taken some notes and are here today to talk about goals and priorities and more and share those with the whole group. So I'd like to invite to the stage Mr. Wes McDonald, the Army DepSO, Dr. Chris Dowd, Navy DepSO, Mr. Cliff Loudon, Air Force DepSO, and Mr. Doug Martin, DLA DepSO. And actually, I'll just start and we'll go down the line here. But we also held an impromptu breakout with industry and non-government standards bodies yesterday, and there's some good takeaways and recommendations from that group. Some things that we'll be talking about and considering with the DepSOs in our meetings in the coming months. But mainly, we focused on how do we better engage on standards development for critical emerging technologies, and then also for promoting digital standards and coordinating how we together move forward in transitioning from primarily, almost exclusively human-based human readable documents to a blend of that includes digital machine readable documents that can be automatically ingested into the digital engineering tools and digital acquisition tools that are being developed and put into use today. And there's also a couple recommendations just regarding recognition and training, kind of a human resource aspect of looking at ways to maybe expand awards within the components. And encourage leadership to recognize those that are actively participating in standardization activities, including things like letters of recognition for contractors are allowed. There are restrictions on how we can award those that are not government. So before I go down the line, are there any questions regarding what we discussed in the industry non-government standards? All right, Cliff.
Good morning, everyone. So yesterday went really well, I thought. It kind of felt a little bit like the first day of high school, where we're like, everyone gets funneled to a different classroom and you see who you have with you. But it turned out to be a really good conversation. We touched on a couple of things like standards for additive manufacturing. We kind of discussed like, well, what does that mean? Do we certify the parts? Are we certifying the process? Are we certifying the printer? And that's what we call good. 'Cause it's all an effort to build confidence, right? So how can we use standards to drive what we maybe predetermine as maybe the right answer, or at least where we want to start? So, very much at the beginning of that conversation, at least in our office, and a lot of exciting work, I think, ahead in that realm. So kind of similar on that topic, we talked about documentation versus certifying. So for example, what is the real power of your signature, right? Is it that it was signed, or was signed and it was delivered via PDF or something that you could download later? So kind of maybe going back to basics and thinking about, when do you snap that chalk line? Then we kind of also talked a little bit about tools. So Tableau, Power BI, your data visualization tools. Who needs to actually know how to build the apps versus who knows how to use the apps? This is just the example, but it kind of brought up the question of training, right? What's the appropriate level of training? And then how can we use, again, standards to drive that behavior that we want to see? A big question that is going to haunt me, I think, is the question of governance. I think that one's probably a challenge that is always going to be there. How do we, again, drive the behaviors that we want? Is it possible that maybe we don't even necessarily need to enforce a rule if we're getting the behavior that we want to see? That's probably a wrong answer. At least it tastes wrong when you say it, right? But in the end, it's all about the product, right? What happens when the rubber meets the road? So I try to keep that in mind when looking at standards. What's the actual goal, and does this standard help us get there, or is it bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake? And then we were posed a couple good questions by Ms. Zimmerman. It was one was, does digital engineering create more opportunities to make mistakes? And so that's a good opportunity for standards. I hate to use the term more standards, just appropriate standards is maybe better. And then finally, how can we use standards to drive some of that cultural change that we were talking about yesterday? Sometimes the question is more philosophical, and it's hard to get straight to work on it. So that's one of the ones that's gonna kind of stew in my mind for a while. But that's kind of the takeaways that we had from yesterday's session, and I really look forward to interacting with my DAF standardization community in the future, because there's a lot of really brilliant people who care about it, and that's what matters most. I want to kind of match that energy of caring as much as my team does. So, thank you.
All right, Wes.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, good morning, everyone. So yesterday's breakout session with the Army went well. We had a small number of people in there. I know there've been a lot from the Army that have been here at the conference this week and have been up here in front of us, and I really appreciate the participation from them and the opportunity I've had to meet new people. So I'm new in the DepSO role. So many of y'all may not recognize my name. You'd probably recognize the guy that came before me. But I've been in this role since about May now. So that gives me a new perspective and kind of open eyes to the situation and hopefully insight into how we might better improve that standardization program within the Army. All the things that Cliff talked about, those are vital things as well. One of the key things that got brought up for us, and this may be unique to the Army situation, was a resource concern, but not resource from the standpoint of people necessarily. If you remember back to at the beginning of the week with the standardization executives, one of the things that Mr. Miyamatsu mentioned was that we have 38 standardization offices. Probably about a third of those offices fall within our DevComs, which are underneath Army's Futures Command. They probably own about half of our standards and specifications that are within the ASSIST database. And one of the struggles that many of the DevComs have at this point is funding. So we went through some situations, and so now their funding is not as plentiful as it was. So they have people with a passion, they have people with a desire to do this work, but because of funding constraints, they've started getting pulled in other directions. So they can't necessarily give the due diligence that they want to these specifications, the old ones that are out there that need updated, the new ones that need to be built. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to look into to see how we might be able to address that and maybe help build that back up so that we can get back into the game at the level where our people want to be, so that we can provide that valuable information, not just to the Army, but these are specs and standards that are used across the services. And so that's one of the things that we need to look into. Just from my standpoint as well, you know, where I come from at Logistics Data Analysis Center, we work with standards, industry standards, government standards. And in my work with those things, I had used Assist from the quick search feature, right? So I was just going in real quick. There were other people on my team that did all the difficult work behind the scenes, right? But now that I've been playing in it more, one of the things I see that I think would be beneficial for many of the people that I've talked with at the Army is some improved training, possibly to give them a little more insight into how they can get the most out of the Assist database with the work that they have to do with that. So I want to try to increase the communication across the board with our standardization offices, just to keep that flow of information open so that we can better support one another and make sure that we are fulfilling the mission that we have in this particular area.
Thank you. Chris Dowd from the Navy. I'm the Navy DepSO. If yesterday was the first day of high school, all the cool kids were with the Navy. So sorry. And we had a successful Navy breakout session, covered about a third of our agenda topics, developed actions regarding the non-governmental standards, access and logistics production tool. I'm not sure if everybody else thinks that's one of the top things, but I think we could probably across the board save some money and get everybody more access if we came to like a consolidated contract. And that was what the Navy thought was one of the top should be one of the top priorities coming out of this. Overall Navy standardization projects and objectives, a reduction of overage assist DSP documents. We set a goal in the Navy to get under 15% this year, and we've already gotten under 50% and driving down. I know Mr. Heafy wants us to get down to 0, and that's a multi-year goal, but we're going to keep pressing down. I always tell the Navy team that I get to be like John F. Kennedy, and say we're going to the moon, say we're going to get under 15% this year, next year, but we're working on the number, probably going to be under 5%. Or probably people gasp whenever I say that, but that's what we're driving down in the Navy. And then talking about yesterday's discussion, one thing that I got very nervous about was whenever I hear more standards, that was said several times by the gentleman from the Air Force. Hopefully what he means is more coverage. The standards cover more areas, and then as we go to models, it's going to be more visual. You don't have to read a 8,000 page S1000D document to understand that. You've got to instead you look at a visual model and you can understand it in a day, as opposed to however long it would take to read 8,000 pages. I don't even know. So that's my thoughts on that. And then the last thing I want to say, and I'm not going to say go Navy beat Army, but I'm going to say go Navy beat China.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Martin. I'm also new to the DepSO role for DLA. One of the things that I find really amazing about this week is just seeing all the work that's being done. I'm excited about the new IT solutions that are going to give us those digital standards and everything. DLA is working on that as well. One of the things that we've been tasked with at DLA, though, is when looking at all the things that the department buys, down to the silliest thing like an envelope, is trying to get a grasp on all the chemicals that are in there. And this comes off of the PFAS issue that the department has seen and trying to assess where that is, throughout our entire supply chains, what service members have been touched by it. So we're trying to figure out how to standardize and receive this information. Not just DLA is going to be receiving it for the Army, the Air Force, the Navy under their procurement contracts as well. So trying to build a standard for that IT information to come from the companies, from the services. And so that's something that we're really trying to work on right now. So.
All right, I'd like to just react to something Chris, you said about the number of standards and maybe how like what changes is more the scope of or the breadth of application of the standards and how we consume them, how we use them. And I made a comment yesterday about there still being human readable standards, and maybe that was out of context for the digital engineering panel, but yeah, I've got all standards in mind here. There are standards, there's process standards, there's standards that are destined for regulation that are still going to be in documents and in a traditional, human readable format. And that's really what I meant there. Completely agree with you on that vision for having standards in just formats that are easily efficient and are relevant for the end user is really the goal. Any other comments? Yeah. Good.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I mean, so Ms. Baldwin briefed the tool that DICE was creating. One of the functions I hope to see out of that is a report out of requirements. And it's not something that's just standards, thinking as an engineer, you want to go through your requirements documents. And if possible, if I can, kill multiple requirements with one, shot, that's outstanding. And so if we can do the same with standards, there will be a lot of overlap, I think, and a lot of redundancy, and that's just maybe the nature of the beast until we can get to 100% efficiency, right? But if I can say, hey, I met this requirement in 63-101, and as a result, I've hit the requirement in 10 different other documents, that's outstanding. So, yeah, so I will stop saying more standards, but think efficient standards, more appropriate standards, and I think there's always room for that, especially if it takes a little bit of burden off the person to I want to say absolve them of understanding the requirement, but absolve them of maybe the admin work or the kind of repetitive stuff that I don't think anyone of us really like to do.
Any other thoughts up here as you heard the others share what was discussed in their breakout? If not, open it up to questions.
So, good morning. And this has to do with just originating agencies actually working in assist to work up perhaps new data item descriptions. And over the last year or so, software bill of materials was a big deal. I heard through back channels that one or many parties were working on it, did for software bill of materials. Never saw a project pop up in assist to actually get the collaboration and the tool that it was supposed to end up in. And wondered if you guys were A, aware of that, and B, have any ideas on making the utilization of existing processes, in particular for new data item descriptions, more likely to occur.
I'm probably the least, experienced person to kind of answer this question, so I want to go first. I see what you describe as a configuration management challenge, and that's something that has been kind of keeping me up at night a little bit. Is how do we lock documents? How do we share documents? How do we route documents to the right people? And that's all stuff that we want to have automated already. I think there's opportunity in the near future to kind of get that functionality into the system. I hope I'm not spoiling anything. But I think we're looking at how we can add those functions because again, automation takes out the human mistake element, right? So I think I'm mumbling now, but at this point I hear what you're saying, and I want those changes in as well because it'll make all our lives easier.
So there is an effort that is kind of fallen off my radar, to be honest. The XBOM, extensible bill of materials, may be what you're referring to. Oh, okay. And DSPO was involved maybe a year ago to clarify some of the intent there up front. Because I think initially it was described as maybe a replacement for DIDs, and then diving into it a little bit deeper, realized what the DID is establishing the requirement for data. XBOM was more of a way of delivering data and formatting it. So I can't unfortunately speak to where that effort sits now. I think it was a CDAO effort, but we can follow up and get you an answer.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's just that I hear somebody's working on a DID, and so if they're working on a DID and they're getting to the point where they want to coordinate it across the community, I would expect that to show up as a project inside of Assist to do that coordination, and crickets. And I don't know if it's because the responsible agency who was doing that work didn't know that was what they were supposed to do, or what.
And if there's anyone in the audience that can speak better to it, please speak up. But I think the last I was tracking of the XBOM effort is they were still working on that format, and that there could be DIDs that then would require delivery of BOM data in that format. But I don't know that those were in development yet. So, Robin?
Yeah, so I'm part of that XBOM team still. So they haven't been meeting as regularly. However, they went from SBOM for software to everything. And then they realized quickly that's a lot to take on. So now they're trying to figure out how to scope it. And also, I don't think we ever talked about it becoming a DID. It was more of a format, a standardized process to get bills of materials in a standardized way to be able to load into all of our tools. But with that said, it could be, we have the ANS acquisition folks that are part of that team too, Rosemary Solomon. She's looking at actually all the DIDs for bills of materials across DoD. We're trying to figure out, we're asking for the same information multiple times in different ways. So we're trying to figure out through the IP cadre whether or not we can consolidate DIDs and how to get the, leverage off of the DIDs that we already have, especially, for DMSMS and configuration management. And so we are still trying to get our act together, I guess, is where we are at. And trying to figure out how to do this in the best way that we can.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way program offices, the way the government gets data on contracts is by either requiring a Cedral on their contract or getting it in a data accession list. If it's a Form 1423 Cedral, one of the blocks on the Form 1423 Cedrals is the format for that Cedral, which is where you have the opportunity to specify a DID, kind of describing the format at least, and to some extent content of that intended Cedral. And in many cases, on at least some of the projects that I'm on, I'm seeing 1423s with no DID. They're locally documenting it on the procedural form rather than working up a bid, getting it approved, giving other people the opportunity to ask for the same data in the same format. And so there's operationally in the contracting side, there's a little bit of chaos there.
So the IP cadre put out a toolkit not too long ago for program offices to use to help them figure out exactly what data they need, what data they don't, whether or not they need actual data or just visibility into data, and really thoroughly explains to them what their options are. And then helps them to strategize on how to get that data. That just happened last year. So I'm hopeful that things will improve.
Could you get that information to NRO Office of Contracts as well? Because we're largely outside of that realm.
Yeah, we'll do that. Question?
Yeah, so on I guess it's not quite related, but it's kind of parallel. It's a difficulty that we run into, and it's especially for those of us at preparing activities that have QPL items that we manage, and William brought this up yesterday in the breakout with the Army, and this concerns getting NSNs issued for products. And so way back, GSA used to issue them, and it used to be really simple. It was real easy. In fact, it's probably one of these situations with the pendulum swinging, right? They just issued them for anything and all occasions, and it was too easy. And I think DLA didn't like that, and so DLA took over that function. But our situation is, it seems like whenever we want to try to gain an NSN, right, and we absolutely wouldn't do it unless we have more than one vendor, right, as per rule or law, and it's like a game of hot potato. Nobody at we try to contact DLA. It could be Richmond, it could be, and then it's like, oh, well, that's not my area, and they try to pass it, and we play email tag, and it just goes on and on and on. It would be really nice if there was a little bit more, at least control of it, or if we had a tool, actually, if it was built into Assist, right, and like an NSN area, and it could have checks in there, checkpoints in there, like it's not going to let you even apply for it unless you have vendors identified, multiple vendors, right? You have to satisfy these conditions before it would even let you do it. And unit of issue, everything, what the FSC that it lines up to is already there because it aligns back to a specification. And it just seems like we could empower the preparing activities more, right? This is something that is subject to abuse for sure, but this is a responsibility that we take seriously, and we know, right? And if you're going to commit fraud, then let that penalties roll. But this is something that we'd like, capability that we'd like to have at our end. And the NSNs are important because that's what feeds the data for the weapons system impact tool, right? That tells you what products we have and where they're getting used, and what the impact of our various specifications are. And when it's hard for us to get NSNs issued, that diminishes the weapon system impact tool to some degree, I would think. So anyways, that would be really great if we could get that capability either added to Assist or maybe rolled into the next generation of Assist. Over.
Okay, I don't want to turn this into the DSPO town hall that we've so any thoughts from the DepSOs?
I mean, just from a DLA perspective, if you're having a problem getting an NSN, you can reach out to me and I can try to help you get to the right people. I can't speak though to an IT solution that, kind of has those checks and balances. I don't think that's anything on DLA's radar to develop right now as far as requesting new NSNs.
I mean, one of the things that they say is, oh, well, we're not gonna, like, one of the things that we get sometimes is like, oh, well, that's gonna have to come from a PM or a PEO office before we even look at that. And it's like, I mean, we're a preparing activity. We wrote the spec. It's, yeah, we have new types of chemical agent resistant coatings rolling out right now. And we're trying to get the QPL set up for this. Right. There's PM offices that, that want to order the new types, the low SOAR loading, or the enhanced, and it's, it's like, it's a real stumbling block. Over.
No, definitely. I can help you push those through.
I mean, it would be nice though, right? If there was something built into Assist though that we could use, and then that would unburden the folks. When we do find the right folks, they're a little bit more unburdened, and we can, it's more of a self-service thing. Over.
Hey, Michael, I think DSPO, and since I manage QPD, we can set up a conversation with the DLA DepSO and with Army to go ahead and kind of work that issue through. So what we can do is take that offline and then get a meeting together to get the requirements, and then we'll look into what we can do. We've generally shied away because the function of cataloging belongs to DLA. With QPD, it was always, traceability back to the part, which is why we used the part numbers the way we use them. But I can see where this can cause some issues. So I think we can at least streamline the process so that we're not taking anything away from DLA. We're not adding anything to DSPO, but I think we can get a dialogue going so we can all get on the same page.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Hey, question?
Yes, can you hear me? Did you hear me?
Now,
Can you hear me?
Closer.
All right. I just want to answer, kind of respond to the question on NSN cataloging. That's a D-list function, DLA logistics. And I just went through that with Additive Man. They're very receptive. So if I can help you, maybe we'll talk afterwards for a process.
Chris?
Thank you. A point of clarification that as you talked, you started out talking QPLs, and then it sounded like you were talking all specs, which is a very different topic than just QPLs, which are resident in Assist. So are you simply talking QPL specs, or are you expanding this to other kinds of specs?
No, it's mainly the specs that tie to a QPL, and we have more than one vendor, and we're trying to get an NSN established for like a product. So it could be like a powder for cold spray, right? Cold spray is an emerging technology under additive, and so we're trying to get new powders on added to the QPL, and then have an NSN so that we can so that it's more trackable, and then it's easier for the depots and everyone to order the qualified powders or chemical agent resistant coatings. Those are the main examples out of the MR preparing activity.
All right, thanks.
Jim?
Yeah. For the panel, I'd like each one of you to try and answer this, because one of the themes we've had today, this week, is engagement and resourcing, right? People, money, things like that. When you, as each of the SRAs in your prospective services go through and you may have some limited funding you gather or provide. I remember back in the day we did get a little bit of money to do some updates of some documents. Do you primarily use civilian labor to do that, or is it some of that funding go to contractors to do document updates in each one of the services? How's that? How are those resources for doing, updating standards, document updates, and other sorts of things? How is that resourced both financially and manpower wise?
So that is a huge question, and I don't think we have the whiteboard space and the markers to like draw that out, right? Because your guess is as good as mine on how those Plinko chips fall through the different areas. We have our MAGCOMs and the going down to the individual PA and who in that team is doing what. So it's never the same way twice as far as I've seen so far, and so I really couldn't answer that question. Not without 12-month study and dedicating separate resources to be able to answer the question. So sorry for that non-answer.
So from the Army's perspective, and I know I brought this up when I initially spoke, my limited insight, I can't really give insight into how all the funding trickles down because I've only been in this role for, like I said, 3 months now. So I will say that I think it varies across our preparing activities, how they receive their fund. For example, where I'm at the Logistics Data Analysis Center, we have several industry standards and handbooks, and we have government standards and handbooks that we work with, but we're funded for that through our actual mission. It's not necessarily coming directly out of funds related to, the Army standardization program through DSPO, things like that. But then our other preparing activities, such as the ones I mentioned from Army Futures Command, they're in a different boat and they've struggled with funding because of that. So again, that's something I'm going to, from the Army perspective, try to look into and see what information I can find out and how we might be able to help those preparing activities that are struggling a little bit on that side. Because like I said, they have the people with the desire, the want to, and the knowledge, but because of funding, they can't really give the due diligence that they feel this deserves and that it does deserve because it's far reaching. So it doesn't really give an answer like Cliff to your question, but just to say from an Army standpoint, I'm aware that this is a concern and something that needs to be looked into.
If for the Navy, and I'm going to look at my colleagues as I answer to make sure I say it right, but it also depends where we have 6 different SysComs. Each one of them has a standardization officer that manages their own standards they're responsible for. And across the board, some of them might get funding specifically for that and some of them don't. But in general, I'd say it's at least 60% civilian. And at some places it's 100% civilian. Over.
Similar situation at DLA. It's, down at the individual like field activity level. So I couldn't give an honest guess of how much. From what I've seen though, a lot of it is handled by civilian, but I'm sure if like there's surge capacity or whatever, they would turn to contracts.
Chris?
In the Navy, we created something we call technical authority, and it was based on this ownership of the standards. So we have actually mapped all the standards in the Navy to a government employee who is a technical authority. Technical warrant holder is what we call it, and they provide the leadership and the ownership and the technical expertise for all the standards. You get into the work, and there are support contractors. And as Chris said, it varies from SysCom to SysCom. Do they have enough money to give to those support contractors? Also, our working capital fund to do the work. And so that's a mix. And as he said, there's a lot of government participation, but there's also quite a bit of contractor support.
Well, there we go. Yeah, so the reason why this really kind of came forward, obviously, it was mentioned by Wesley and a few others, is like last Friday, the appropriations bill came out, and I was looking at it and I noticed there was a single line in the appropriations bill for like $5 million for the defense standardization program. And it was just kind of like going, oh, that's great. That's probably not your salaries. I hope not. I think that's the money that maybe flows down to do standards work at the different levels of organizations. But is there some way that we can collectively go forward and try and bring this to the senior leadership? It seems to be coming out, as high as Ms. Shu and her recent policy that came out, that we see strong leadership and advocacy for the work that standards can do. Is there any way we can, get that plussed up to get a higher number to be able to provide more resources to the people that are actually doing the work? I think that collectively, if all the services came forward with that might be something that's worth the effort to try and press forward. Because so oftentimes, our budgets are, well, what was your budget last year? Well, we're going to put in for the same budget this year or next year. It never changes, or just only shrinks. It never grows, right? So I don't know. Just to me, the resources are not just financial, but it's also people. And if you've got people that want to do the work, and they're not resourced to do it either through their salary or through, even just incidental things like travel and things like that, that I think piece is solvable, right? So I think we could figure out a way to do that, but I don't know. Thoughts are running around my head, and I was just thinking that it might be something that's worth pursuing.
Certainly something we can work through the DepSO forum and council.
I think part of the answer to that is a not nice one, which is we have to work the system, right?
Right.
And I think we're willing to do that, but then we have to press on the entire community to build our case. And so we will. But so, along those lines, I'll have to ask these gentlemen as you work through the solution to your problems, I need you to document it. I need you to document every step, who it touched. So I could use that as a sequence diagram for database updates, for one, and then two, to make a case of, hey, see how many people this had to go through? I need more than that. I'll have to write risk charts or PRFAQs or whatever, project management technique you need to sell your leadership on. But that's, that all the way up through Congress. So, easy day.
Yes. So I'm sorry for dominating the conversation a little bit, but for example, we just did this S-series study for Congress. Senate requested us to do this study. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was we have to be engaged, and we have to fund that engagement. So now we have something that we can reference when we go to Congress and say, hey, look, if you're really interested in adopting and using these standards, we need engagement, and we need people, and we need funds. And, to me, I think you can draw those linkages. You can connect those dots when you go forward for funding requests and say, look, this is something Congress is interested in us pursuing. Why? Let's step up and have Congress appropriate funds for this, right? These type of activities. So I don't know. I think it just gives you, that was great that we got this study down on paper, because now you have something you can reference, and that's a document you can reference as justifies it. Because like you said, you need rationale, you need justification, you need to bring that forward. Otherwise, it's just like, well, we need more money. What for? Well, just because we need more, that never applies.
Right. And reaching the top of that mountain of just having that document is one thing, but will it be compelling enough to be prioritized by Congress is a whole nother thing.
Yep.
And so I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of fun to be had.
I got it. I got it. But if you don't at least have something to begin with, you're not going to make headway.
Absolutely. I don't want to oversell it, but I think we're in it to win it as much as we can.
All right, we are well past schedule, and we'll take that time from the town hall later. We have a question online. Good.
Okay. The question is, there are a number of mil specs which have been canceled with an industry spec adopted. These canceled mil specs continue to be validated even though they have not been updated since 1994, whereas the industry standard is current. Who are my resources to address this? And it's for FSCs 4020 and 8305.
So please reach out to DSPO with you provided the FSCs, but the documents, if they're canceled, there's not a need for them to be validated. So we can take that one offline later. Do we have any other questions for the DepSOs before we close this panel?
You're not off schedule, I don't think. You have until 9:35, I believe. So I just want to let you guys know you have a little bit more time if you want it.
Thank you. I have a typo in my.
Oh, it's okay. So with that said, I'll ask another question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the big hot topics, especially since COVID happened, we lack visibility into our supply chain. It kind of goes to what you were talking about, Doug, with PFAS. Again, the big magnifying glass is being, illuminating our supply chain vulnerabilities. We're trying to figure out a way as part of not only the Defense Microelectronics cross-functional team, but the Enterprise Parts Management System team, and even the Supply Chain Risk Management Working Group that I'm part of. How do we, or have you guys heard from each of the services, how are you trying to crack the code on getting data down to the 4th, 5th tier level that includes not only microelectronics, but chemicals, materials, what about COTS, as a whole other animal? What are your thoughts on that, or what are you hearing in each of the services as to what's going on with supply chain visibility efforts?
I guess I'll start. So, and that is a huge part of what we're trying to tackle. And what we're getting down to is that full chemical disclosure, or that's our end goal, Some of the road bumps we've come across is, a lot of companies have their secret sauce. They don't want to share that, patented information or whatever, their industry secrets. So that's something that we're also trying to develop a system to receive and hold this information that, will make them comfortable that it's not going to access will be limited and everything. I think right now, so we're trying to attack it from a multitude of different ways. We're trying to work a FAR change, work a DFAR change. We're also trying to get the system ready to receive the information. We're exploring different avenues, whether it's a mil spec or a commercial spec, to try to build out how that data will be received from the services. And this is all coming down from EINE and ANS as tasking DLA to do this. So we're definitely working on it. I don't know when we'll be there. There's a lot of hurdles. So we are working with some different industry groups as well. One of the ways we've kind of looked at it is most companies, at least when they're producing their SDSs, they load their whole chemical profile into a vendor's system. And then they're like, okay, I want you to release this information to the provider. So those companies that help, those contractors that help companies produce those SDSs already have complete listings of their chemicals. So we're trying to see if maybe we could do something along those lines to help the receipt and flow. A lot of pretty much every company that runs these SDS creation softwares, they have XML outputs. They're all different. So that's where we're trying to find an industry standard, or to develop an industry standard for that sharing of information. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would love to, I'll get you in the loop on a couple of things. So we're building the enterprise parts management system, which will be the first time that you can plug in a part number and you can see across DoD who's currently using it, who's, current demand, future demand, any obsolescence issues, any supply chain risk management, counterfeit, stuff like that. So I want to make sure that whatever you guys are building, we're aligned. Or maybe what we're building might be a solution for you all as well. The supply chain risk management folks are setting up what they're calling a supply chain risk integration cell. And I think that, I'm a big fan of striking while the iron's hot. It's a very, very hot topic right now. So we might be able to use that new organization as it stood up to be able to get some resources for some of the things that we're trying to do, and even standards that what Jim was talking about earlier. So I'm keeping that all in the back of my head, and maybe we can work together to try to get them to help us tackle some of the challenges we're facing.
No, definitely. I'd love to get involved. We have a team. What you're saying, resourcing has been an issue for us. I mean, our primary tasking came out of EI&E. It's not the big money part of the Department of Defense. So it's definitely been a struggle trying to get those resources. But I do think it's happening in so many different places where they're trying to assess the supply chain and all of this. And, the further along we get in, we're always finding little groups that are trying to add a bit. It might not be the whole picture, but something that they've noticed that's been a sticking point for them that they're trying to expand on and get that information available. And of course, sharing amongst, all the different services, that's also, getting that data to flow between the services so that we can have like efforts, and see some cost savings there.
Any other questions online?
What is the latest guidance on using NATO standards? Should we be working towards relying on NATO standards fully with any reservations, or should we be maintaining U.S. standards even if somewhat duplicative?
So the policy answer, there's a preference for the use of U.S. ratified NATO STANAGs or other international standardization agreements. And of course, we should work to harmonize those with the any other standards that we are using. Any other thoughts?
Just from my experience, a lot of the NATO standards are ratified American standards because the other countries don't have as much, efforts on the standardization. So they normally should align, actually, or in a lot of cases.
Yeah, the few I've encountered, they need to be in alignment, right? Or if they're not in alignment, then we need to know where they're not, or what's tailored for us, right? So it's like Mr. Havey mentioned, there's the prioritized, list of compliance, but I think there's always going to be that need for at least double checking, and maybe that's not efficient, but it's some things you want to be, thorough and as late as possible, right?
One thing I would add, if you're out there and you're looking at those NATO STANAGs and you notice a discrepancy in there that kind of feels off pace to what you feel you've been using in the past based on the standards and the guidance that we already have in place. Let your DepSO know. Share that information. I mean, I already know I have one in mind right now that we've reviewed and we made advances on it, but it's still slightly off in some areas. So if you come across that, make sure you let your DepSOs know, let DSPO know, so that we're able to track that and see which one of those maybe we need to dive a little more into if we possibly can.
But I think it's interesting to say that's policy, but whenever I look at what we actually put on contract, we're not putting NATO's STANAGs on contract. We're using DoD standards, we're using Navy standards, those kind of things. So I think if that's really the intent, we would need to push it harder, like make it required. But even like a CM standard from NATO is a little bit different than ours, and it would drive cost into contracts if we had to use that one instead of the military standard. So I see that as it's interesting. It's something to look at, but it's we're putting U.S. standards on contract. Over.
Yeah, in many cases, that putting those U.S. standards on contract is in accordance with NATO STANAGs. So,
Michael?
not that, yeah.
I-
Go ahead,
I'm-
Tasha.
I'm sorry. I get excited whenever NATO's mentioned. So the answer is quite complicated. So there is a process. So I would refer to DODM 4120.24. The NATO STANAGs is not these other documents off somewhere else to be considered if we want to. Our policy has a hierarchy for how we choose and select standards. So being interoperable with our allies is pretty high up on the SecDef list of priorities. So there is a whole framework of how we participate. And we have lead agents, we have DoD components who are responsible for engaging with NATO. And then we have preparing activities who are responsible for maintaining our other DSP documents like MIL standards, MIL specs. When you see a MIL spec being used, and then you see the STANAGs that cover the same topics, sometimes that MIL spec is being used to implement that STANAG. So you can't really say, oh, why do we still have this MIL spec? There is a database, the NATO Standardization Document Database, and we use that system as well as e-reporting to submit U.S. responses to NATO STANAGs. And sometimes you'll see that for STANAG 4107 or STANAG 3447, we're using this MIL spec to implement it. So it's complex, but not yet complex. And ASSIST, you can see those relationships. And I think that's the beauty of ASSIST, that we try to bring in information that that the acquisition community is using to put things on contract, and STANAGs are used in contracts. And you can see the relationships between the MIL specs and the STANAGs if there is one. If there is an alignment, and what was mentioned earlier, if you don't know better, you contact your DepSO. But I would look up the STANAG and ASSIST, and as Michael mentioned, if we've ratified it, it will be there. And you'll see the POC for that STANAG. And if something's squirrely and you're not quite sure, you can contact that POC. And then you can also see the relationship between the STANAG and the MIL spec. If you're on the international side and you're like, oh, something's squirrely with that MIL spec, you can contact the person responsible for the MIL spec. But if you're completely confused, you can always contact DSPO or your DepSO, and we can get you squared away. But I wouldn't necessarily, I don't want anyone to walk away from here today thinking that NATO STANAGs are not used in contracts, or we don't have a system that's complementary, because we do. Over.
The only thing I'll add to that, Tasha, is that we also have a preference, as you've heard many times over the past couple of days. There's a U.S. government-wide preference for the use of non-government standards. Well, many of those NATO STANAGs and other international standardization agreements are for the use of ASTM and SAE ISO standards, right? The STANAG 4597, I think it is, for obsolescence management it's a cover agreement to use an ISO standard. So the STANAG may not be what's cited on contract, and we still may be implementing it. I think it's, as Tasha said.
Right. And in a similar thread to add on to what she was saying, you know, other countries will use our US standards in their purchasing because that's how they're implementing the STANAG as well.
I think we have time for another question.
So it's a little bit of a make work thing. I know in many cases, sorry, closer to the mic. Yeah. In many cases, I'll see somebody, perhaps a policy document, cite a mill standard. You go out there, you realize, hey, that mill standard's been canceled. And you'll look at the cancellation notice and it references a commercial standard replacement. You go out and I haven't by and large been looking in assist for the adoption notice of that commercial item replacement. I go out to the SDO for that commercial item and realize that it's been evolved 4 times since the cancellation notice. And like I say, I haven't been checking in assist for the adoption notices to see if the first hop adoption notice is there. I'm not sure that we're keeping the adoption notices up to date with the revisions that the SDOs are publishing. And that would be an interesting thing to discover and perhaps bring back in date. Over.
I can't speak across the board, but I do know from our standpoint, we have several standards and handbooks with SAE for the Lifecycle Logistics Supportability Committee related to product support analysis, logistics, product data. And like you said, those non-government standards, just like the process we have with our government standards, they require revisions, validations. Every time we come in and we revise one of those documents, we then put in an updated notice within assist. So there's a corresponding, at least with ours, I can't guarantee that everyone is doing that, but they should be. There will be an updated adoption notice with the revisions.
Well, and they expire. So as the adoption notice is going to expire, we review them and make sure we can revalidate them.
Thank you.
Chris?
So I think we're talking about tier 1 adoption notices, and I helped create the rule set for what is tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 has to be, as you described, the adoption notice is updated every time that standard is updated. And tier 2, you don't have to update the adoption notice at all. But I'm thinking we didn't put into the rule set that if this is a standard that's dictated by policy, then it needs to be tier 1. So maybe that's something to look at as we update the 4120.24M.
I mean, for instance, in some policy documents, I still see references to Mill Standard 498 or DoD Standard 2167A. And you go out there and you go, oh, well, that's been superseded by Joint Standard 16, which turned into ISO IEC IEEE 12207. They may list the original version, but it was revised in 2006 and 2017, and it's under revision again right now. So running that currency trades, and I don't know if Assist has, for instance, that one in as a tier 1 or tier 2 adoption notice. I would have to go and look, but it's things like that helping people through the money trail when they're only making the first hop and not realizing that they got 5 more hops to go through before they get to the end point.
I know that when I canceled Mill Standard 3018, Michael had me do a search in Advana to see which all the policy documents that would affect. And then we did contact all of those policy document owners and let them know that they needed to update their policy. So that's one way of doing that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning. I was going to mention the same. The Game Changer tool in Advana is excellent for doing that sort of analysis. So it pains me when I see policy documents that have been updated, but the references to standards haven't been. And we have the tools, but that feedback loop doesn't exist for every policy.
So if I could ask this rhetorically, when we find these discrepancies, do we report them out? Because until all this is fully automated and we have, the full AI to do that lift for us, then we have to rely on the community to, when they find a problem, to elevate it so that it could be fixed, right? And especially, again, another configuration management issue. It's a labor intensive, human intensive process still. So, bring forward.
And one of the tools that DSPO updates periodically, and one day we'll get that automated as well, as the SD21. So we've already mentioned one of the mandatory considerations for standardization, like decisions. So one is the preference for the use of international standardization agreements that have been ratified by the US. Another is standards that have been mandated or required in law, policy, or regulation. And there's a list in SD21 of those standards and which policy, law, or regulation requires its use. Others are parts management. So now Mill Standard 11991. And the other is the DSR. So those of you that were here on Monday got some training on the DSR. So those are the four mandatory required considerations for those making standardization decisions. I think we're at our time. So thank you. Thank you to the DepSOs and those that participated in the breakout sessions yesterday. I think it was a valuable time for all of us. And I know year after year when we have conferences, it's something that's requested, is just a good opportunity to meet within your components. So, thank you.